Good afternoon, everyone. I am Chandan Raikar from Department of Media Studies, School of Arts, Humanities and Social Sciences, Reva University, and I will be your host for today's webinar. I request all the attendees to please turn off your web cameras and keep your microphones on mute. However, you may unmute them during the question and answer session. We make sense of what we see based on our own judgment, as well as our past experiences, and sometimes based on our worldview or outlook. An image or text and the way it is presented can be biased and influence the viewer. To take a particular stance on a matter, these visuals and information themselves can conjure or sway our thinking in a particular direction. Therefore, as an established Department of Media Studies in South Asia, we are conducting a series of knowledge webinars on various topics related to media literacy. The Reva Knowledge Webinar Series invites prominent academicians and scholars from around the globe to deliver their knowledge for the betterment of our society. Today, we are privileged to have Professor Dr. Glenn W. Mashert to deliver his lecture on digital divide in Turkey, the internet and social inequality in international perspective. Dr. Glenn W. Mashert is Professor of Sociology in the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at Khalifa University, Abu Dhabi. He holds a PhD in Sociology from the University of Colorado and a BS in International Studies from Drexel University, USA. He has formerly served as the Faculty of Sociology, Social Justice, and Media Studies at Miami University, USA, and the Law and Society faculty at Purdue University, USA. His academic expertise lies in the sociological study of social problems and their solutions via social policy and the use of digital technologies in social and economic development. In the academic fields of sociology, media studies, and justice studies, he has written and edited a dozen of academic volumes and special collections in reputed international journals, dozens of peer-reviewed academic articles, and dozens of chapters in academic volumes. He is currently serving as the Secretary of Society for the Study of Social Problems. He has served in numerous editorial positions on academic journals and is the lead program manager for the book series Agenda for Social Justice. Professor, it is an honor to have you with us today on this virtual platform. The session is all yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Chandan. As I sit here listening to this warm welcome, I'm having a great feeling about my participation, and I'd like to start off with a few words of thanks, not only to yourself, but more broadly. So thank you to Dr. Manjunatha for inviting me and for bringing me in as a part of this series. Thank you to Reva University, Bangalore. I only wish I could be in person in someday. Abu Dhabi is not so far away, and God willing, we will have the opportunity to meet in person either here in UAE or in India. It's not so far away, even though the pandemic makes the distance seem too far, actually. Thank you also to the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences and the Department of Media Studies. I'm very honored to be a part of this Reva Knowledge Series on media literacy. My understanding is that this is the first of 5 days of presentations, and so I'm honored to be the first. I can only hope that I can set a good tone for my colleagues who will follow up one each day of this week to give another presentation. So thank you for the warm welcome. I also would like to welcome everybody who is in the audience today. I only wish I could be there in person to see your faces. However, in these situations, we do the best that we can. So I greet you with Assalamu alaikum, Namaskar, and hello to my dear friends. So I will move into this presentation, which is on the topic of digital divide and digital skills in Turkey. So this is a series of projects that I worked on with colleagues in Turkey. I was a visiting scholar 3 times in Turkey, particularly in the East Anatolia, Northeast Anatolia region. And we've published a series of papers and chapters on this topic. Really, this is a groundbreaking set of studies because they are the first studies in a non-Western context of the digital divide and digital skills. Okay, so next slide, please. Thank you. The overall plan of the presentation is to give to talk about some of the findings of 2 related studies that have come out of this series of studies. The first one is a journal article on the determinants of digital skills in Northeast Anatolia, Turkey. It was published in the Journal of Multicultural Discourses last year. And the second is to speak about a book chapter called A Comparison of High Skill and Low Skill Internet Users in Northeast Anatolia, Turkey. It was published in Ragneda and Gladkova's edited volume on digital inequalities in the Global South, published by Palgrave Macmillan. I should also mention with gratitude that this research is funded by TÜBİTAK, which is the Scientific and Technological Research Council of Turkey, kind of the National Science Foundation for Science and Technology in Turkey. So always good to give gratitude for those who have funded. As part of the requirements with TÜBİTAK, we are meant to make the findings of our research as widely available as possible. So the organizers here have PDF copies of these 2 publications that we can share on request, and we certainly would welcome you to engage our work to offer any suggestions for how we might improve our work, and also to maybe it can motivate some similar work to happen in settings in India or other countries where it has not yet been studied. Okay, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So I want to give an overview of the study. The first study was the big study. It's a quantitative study of 400. We had more, but it ended up to be about exactly 400 valid cases of internet users in Northeast Anatolia. And so this is the northeast quadrant of Turkey that borders on the countries of Georgia and Armenia and Iran. Okay, so the purpose of these studies was to look at the digital skills, is to get a benchmark, to get an assessment of the digital skills of the internet users in that region of Turkey. The motivation behind it is that this region of Turkey, typically the eastern part of Turkey, and the Northeast in particular, are the areas that lag in development in comparison to the rest of the country of Turkey. So therefore, the types of initiatives, the types of research that they're looking for are things that will help them to develop the country. Okay, so among policymakers, there's this, I would say, a somewhat simple assumption that may be in part true, may be in part not true. It's a little bit more complicated, but this assumption that providing digital technologies and internet connectivity to areas that are less developed will lead to greater development in that area. And so indeed, that's the underlying question, right? If the people in Northeast Anatolia are wired, then will they catch up with the rest of Turkey? Okay, and so it's the hope of the policymakers in the capital, Ankara, that yes, the answer would be yes, And as I get through this talk, I'll clarify to you that I think that yes, in part it is helpful. It may be necessary for the development of this quadrant of the country. However, it's certainly not sufficient for the development of this country. Just connecting people in itself does not spur the economic and social development. The study was one where the respondents were given PCs. So we set up laptops, and then we recruited the participants to come to our location, and we provided them tasks to complete using the internet. So the subjects were identified. I'll get to that in a bit. But what we did was we did performance tracking. Previous studies have given self-report surveys where they ask the people about their level of internet skill, and the validity of such studies is oftentimes questionable, is sometimes questionable because people with low skills may overestimate their skills simply because they don't know how to evaluate their skills. Okay, so this performance tracking allows us to have a more objective determination of the skill levels. So you give people a PC, you give them tasks to complete, you monitor whether they complete those tasks and how long it takes them to complete those tasks. And these are the findings of the first study that I mentioned. So next slide, please. I want to give a brief overview of what we call the digital divide or inequality in the digital sphere. And the digital divide has been through a number of waves in terms of the study of this digital inequality. The first level of digital divide, which now are considered sort of more older types of studies happening, say, 10 plus years ago, are the studies that looked at whether or not people had the access. Okay, so earlier digital divide studies looked at whether people had access, connectivity to the internet, and how fast that access was, and for example, that was the first level. Okay, and so this is an issue that still continues in many areas of the world where people lack connectivity. Not everybody is connected to the digital media. However, on the other hand, there are plenty of places, and Turkey would be an example, where the penetration of the internet is so high and the threshold for entering into the internet of using a smartphone, the cost is so low that this first level digital divide is less important than ever before. So now what we look at in these studies is what they call the second level of digital divide, and that's us studying digital skills. Okay, so the digital skills sort of look at the second level, that the first level, once it being overcome, that people actually have connectivity to the internet. The second level becomes whether or not people have the skills to be able to use the internet effectively. Okay, so they're using Van Derzen and Van Dijk, who are a couple of big names in digital divide studies there in Holland. We use their model to describe different types of digital skills. And so they have two overall types: the medium-related skills and the content-related skills. The medium-related skills are those that deal with whether or not the people can operate, like turn on the computer, connect it to the cords or the Wi-Fi, or to connect it to an Ethernet cable, or whether the people can use a mobile phone or tablet to access Wi-Fi or the mobile digital service, for example. And the formal skills are those where we look at people's ability to kind of navigate the hypertext format of the internet to be able to kind of get where they want to go in a virtual sense in the internet. Okay, the second type that we look at are content-related skills, and the content-related skills are those that deal with like kind of how people use the information, right? And so the first type is what we call information skills. The information skills are those that are related to whether or not people can identify and find information using the internet. So if you give a person a sort of a fact to find, whether or not they can search through the internet to find the information that is requested, or that they need. And also the information skills does include a level at which people are able to determine credible information from non-credible information. Okay, and the strategic skills are those skills that are defined as being the ones where can people therefore use the information to find to benefit themselves. Okay, so using these other medium related skills and the information skills, the question becomes, are the people subsequently able to use that information to their advantage? Do they get better education? Do they get better economic deals? Do they advance their health and wellness and those sorts of things? Right. So what we're looking at is like something that is a kind of a much more human-centered aspect of the digital divide than the first level. The first level was limited much more to the issues of like kind of technical capacity, which is also related to economic capacity, right? The ability to afford and use the digital resources. However, these digital skills are much more in the possession, a human side, and the development in the part of, say, a workforce or a population or segment of the population. And so this is why these are so important. And indeed, like kind of the types of like skills tracking study that we conducted is very important because it gives this third party, more objective view of the digital skills. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so my sample is 400 people from 3 provinces in northeast Anatolia. They are the provinces of Bayburt, Erzincan, and Erzurum. And each of those is a province, but also has a city by the same name, which is the capital of the province. We identified our households using Turkstat, which is a database provided by the Turkish Statistical Institute. And so we contacted households and first asked them if there was an internet user in the household, and if so, how many, and we randomly selected one internet user from the identified households, and that's where our sample comes from. So our sample should be fairly reliable as a sample for the populations of these 3 provinces in northeastern Turkey. Next slide, please. So to give you the context, this presentation is sometimes for undergraduates and things, and so I just don't want to assume that everybody knows. But this is where Turkey is. It literally is a kind of a crossroads of the world. It was kind of like historically this place of Anatolia was like kind of the western end of the Silk Road that went all the way over to China, and to some extent this was kind of the crossroads of the world, like kind of economically speaking and culturally speaking as well. And what I'm studying is this top right quadrant of the country of Turkey, as you see on the right hand side, these the borders of Georgia, or they call Georgistan, Armenia, and also Iran. And so I'm not in control of the cursor, but if you could point out if you see Erzurum on the north right, it's kind of a salmon colored, orange color. And then Bayburt is a green color, and Erzincan is a blue color in that top right. So these regions are not, these provinces are not right on the border, but they're close. They're sort of considered the central regions of northeast Anatolia. Okay, so next slide, please. And I always just like to show, here are some pictures. The top left picture is a picture of Erzincan, and these are really wonderful places that they're not like kind of when people say that they've been to Turkey, they rarely have gone to these areas. They're perfectly wonderful places with wonderful people and cities and lots of things of interest. However, they're far removed in some ways from kind of the touristy areas along the coasts and the areas where people visit places, say Istanbul. Top left is Erzincan, literally sits on a geological fault line, and the geological fault line on one side, you're in a valley looking at two mountain ranges, and the one mountain range is part of the Siberian geological plate, and the other one is part of the Arabian Mesopotamian sub. And indeed, the Euphrates River, which is one of the rivers known from Mesopotamia, the land between rivers, begins in Erzincan. The top right is a picture of the room. It sits about 2,200 meters in elevation. It's quite cold. It's the largest city in East Anatolia, and has sort of been famous in particular for holding World Cup ski events there. So while most people may not think of Turkey as being a very mountainous and cold area, this area certainly is. And then the bottom pictures are of Bayburt, which is even less famous than Erzincan and Erzurum, but nonetheless it has a sort of a medieval fortress, and it's a perfectly fine place. Okay, next, please. So the sample characteristics I'm going to breeze over quickly, but basically we have ensured a very good balance among these three trajectories. The first is a gender balance. The second is an age balance. We have people from different age groups. However, there is a skew towards the young. Right, so those people who are middle-aged, such as myself, or older aged, there's very less of them, possibly because there are fewer internet users at the age is more difficult to identify. And we also have quite a spread in terms of education, that third dimension. Okay, next slide, please. So now I'm moving into the findings of the first study. The findings of the first study indicate that 32.3% of the participants, that's almost 1/3, failed all of the skills tests. So all of the tasks, even though they're internet users, they identified as internet users, they had such a low level of skill that they failed all of the skills tests. Okay, and then as you move up, we have 26% who are successful in only one type of skill area. Those usually like the basic skills of turning on the internet and connecting to the internet. 15% were successful in two skills. 15% were successful in three types of skills, and only 10 or almost 11% were successful in all four types of the skills. Okay, so this is the overall image that you can get of the population that we studied, which is that the internet users had a relatively low, in this region of Turkey, have a relatively low skill level. Okay, so that's the most basic finding. So now I'll move into forward to discuss some of the determinants of these skills, things that we have found as being as possibly causing these skills or correlating with these skills. So please move forward. Next slide. Okay, the first is to look at the correlation among the different types of skills. So we have the four varieties of skills, and we see that in all cases, the bivariate correlations between these skill types are all positively related in a significance level that is less than probability of 0.01. Okay, so next slide, please. A little bit about the skills, a little bit more of an interpretation. The participants are most successful in the formal skills. That is, turning on connecting to the internet and navigating the internet. The formal skills are followed by the operational skills, the information, and the strategic skills. respectively. So this, especially we note that the strategic skills are quite low. So that 10% of the population that had that we studied, the sample that we studied that had all four skill sets, they were most likely that the difference between those who had three and those who had four was whether or not they had the strategic skills. That is, whether or not they can use the internet for their own advantage. Okay, and so that's the overall pattern. But I do want to point out that while all forms of the digital skills are positively correlated with one another, this relationship is not strictly determined, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that if a person has one type of skill that they will have another type of skill. So what we get is this image of these four types of skills conceptually is that they are overlapping and related, but there are, you know, kind of that Venn diagram where you have the multiple circles and that there's an overlapping part, but there are still some parts of the skills that are independent. Okay, next please. So this table is the table where I report on multiple regression of the predictive ability of demographic factors on digital skills. Okay, and so what we find is that there are all of our variables, the demographic variables, that's age, gender, income, and education. Would you please go back to? No. Something happened. We jumped around a bit. Maybe number 12. Yeah, number 12 is where we currently. Thank you. Okay, so this so the point here is that all of the demographic factors are significantly determinative, that significantly influence digital skill levels. Okay, next slide, please. So the factors that are significantly predict the digital skill levels are age, gender, education, and household income. Specifically, the older a person is, and women tend to have lower digital skills. Okay, so the younger people and men that we studied had higher digital skill levels, and also income and education were positively associated with digital skill levels. That is, those with higher incomes and those with higher educations had higher digital skill levels. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this table is a regression of internet use habits on digital skill levels. Okay, so we looked at things such as the years of experience using the internet, the number of hours weekly that a person uses the internet, the number of devices that people use to access the internet, and the number of places, that is physical places such as work, home, library, cafe, so on, where people access the internet. Okay, so we found that 3 of these 4 are significantly related. Move forward one, please. Next, please. Okay, so the internet use characteristics that are positively related to digital skills are internet use weekly, that the more hours people use internet, the higher their skills tend to be. The number of devices that they access to use the internet. Sometimes people use one device to access the internet, say like a laptop, but there was possibility for people to report having multiple devices, smartphones, tablets, smart TVs, and so on. Okay, and then the number of places that the people access the internet, the higher skills they have. So they work, school, home, cafes, so on, libraries, then they tended to have higher digital skills. The one that was not related to digital skills level, that was non-significant, was the years of experience using the internet. It's not necessarily about like how long people have been using the internet, even though it seems like it should be, right? Like that the more years you use the internet, the greater is your skill development. But in our data, that did not seem to be supported. Next, please. Okay, so that's the issue. That's the conclusion of the first study. And now what I want to do is to move into the second study and give you an overview of what this one. This was it's a typo. It should say qualitative study, right? However, this is a qualitative study of only 8 participants from the same population of 400. The respondents were selected from the earlier quantitative study, and we tried to find kind of to divide people with high skill and low skill users and men and women and so on, in order to kind of interview them to find out that they're more in depth from their perspective, like what their skill level was and what their attitudes about their internet use were. Okay, so we conducted in-depth interviews with 8 people, a subset of that 400, and our research involved the interviews to discuss their internet skills and attitudes. And so this one is the second of the publications, which is a book chapter on the high skill and low skill users. The general question is, we wanted to know in a more nuanced way, how were the high skill and the low skill users different? And we were able to use our earlier study as a point of departure because we had the verification of the people's skill levels. And so our recruitment was able to skip kind of these trying to assess the person's skill level. And we just jump into sort of interviewing people. Next, please. So we have five users who we classified as the high skill users, and here you see that their age is on average fairly young, that they're more likely to be males, that they have generally kind of a university or even a postgraduate degree, and we also asked them about their different online activities. So these included a wide variety of things such as seeking information, news, shopping, social network sites. We also asked them specifically what sites they used, watching videos, gaming, and so on. So these are the characteristics of the people who had relatively high skills. So next slide, please. The next slide is one that gives the characteristics of those people who we interviewed for this short study who were the low skill users. And here you can see that they are more likely to be middle-aged, right? 2 of the 3 were women. They had low levels of education, right? And that the reason why they use the internet or their online activities were relatively focused on social networking as the most popular, but to a lesser extent on reading some news or seeking information. Next slide, please. Okay, so the findings here is that among the low-skilled users, they reported that they are aware that they have low skill compared to the high-skilled users. Okay, so it was an interesting finding for the people to say that they know that their skill level is low. They are also aware that the high-skilled people get better advantages. So, for example, they would report that my friend or my community person in my community who they perceived as being a high skilled user got some advantages, like they were able to take a course, they got a better deal on buying or selling something, they get better health information, they get information about things like social services or benefits that one might use. And so the low skilled users are aware that they have low skills, and they're also aware that their low skill level seems to exclude them from some of the benefits that other people seem to be getting through their internet use. But the real kicker here is that the real point is that they're also unsure how to develop better skills. Okay, they're also unsure how to develop better skills. So this is something that feeds back to the policymakers in the provinces, but also in the national policymakers who have this vision that the internet, providing the internet to the people in the lagging area, the area that lags in development, will lead to the increased development in that area. And I would say that such a policy may have been very current in the past. However, at this point in history, such a policy is a little bit behind the curve, in that what is needed now is to provide ways that people can develop the internet skills and to use them for their advantage, and that otherwise the people are going to be left behind. So simply citing the statistics of, like, we put up X number of cell phone towers with 5G or 4G, 5G, or we ran broadband cables out to the villages and so on, or even we provided the devices to people in a certain village for them to use the internet, that doesn't go far enough, because I work at a technical university, Khalifa University of Science and Technology, and so as a sociologist, I always tell my students that it doesn't matter if you have a technology that, it could be the greatest technology in the world, but if people don't use it, it doesn't mean anything. For the pandemic, I have been telling the students that, there are so many places in the world where people have these anti-vax movements and so on. That is, while the world was working on the development and the production of the COVID vaccines, I always try to remind my students that if the people will not use the vaccine, then it won't be effective. And so this lesson is one that I think that those of you who are in media studies, which all of you are, right, can really relate to, right? Is that, we are social scientists, and while we might study things like media literacy, and in this case, it's kind of like the technical ability, but also the information abilities and strategic abilities to use the internet. It doesn't mean much to have the internet if the people don't use it effectively. So as I started off this, I was mentioning that there was that providing the internet connectivity to the areas of that in the country of Turkey that lag in development is maybe a necessary part of the development of that region, is certainly not sufficient. Okay, so without the greater skills process to develop skills, this development simply won't happen, as the people, even if they're aware that they don't have the skills, they don't know how to get them. So a very typical story that I've heard, not only in these interviews, but from others in this region as well, is that especially the older, middle-aged, and elderly people, they may get connected, but once they're connected, they remain as low-skill users. A very typical one was, I'm of a certain age that many of you, some of you are probably as well, but I remember that when I was in primary school, there would be like kind of annual photo day. So once a year, they would take a photo that would have all of the kids in the class in the photo with the teacher, and you hold up a sign that says first grade, second grade, so on, right? And then they would also take a photo of each individual child. And they would send these home, and it became kind of an annual thing where sort of your auntie and your grandmom and so on, even the neighbor down the street or down the lane from you, they expected this. And so I'm born and raised in the United States, and it's a very typical American thing that we have, the refrigerator is always made of metal, so you have a magnet and you'd have pictures of the various children. So, picture grandmom wants the pictures of the kids. So they tell us a story about how they became connected to the internet because they asked for the pictures of the grandchildren. And they're expecting to receive like every year like pictures of the grandchildren. But what happens is that people say, grandmom, like we have all these pictures, but they're on Facebook or they're on Instagram or wherever people are posting, right? And so grandmom says, what's Facebook? Or, I don't know how to use the internet. And so they get grandmom a smartphone, they get grandmom a tablet, and she, connect her to something like Facebook, and then so she then becomes an internet user, but she remains one of these low-skilled internet users because she's mostly using it for things like WhatsApp and Facebook or Instagram, and then to a lesser extent, like kind of watching videos on Netflix and these kinds of things. Yeah. So this is the one major finding that I would like to say is that we need to advocate as social scientists for the skill development of the people and to help those people who are in the policy sphere to understand that it's going to take that level of development. And so while the site of much of this education takes place in schools, and it's easier to sort of mandate certain sort of education in schools, we have generations of people who are not in school and literally have no strategy for how they can develop better skills. The second thing that developed in this, that emerged in this one, that's also very interesting, was a clear gender dynamic. And this gender dynamic was one that was a bit confusing to me at first, right? Well, we know that in that part of Turkey in particular, there's a traditional kind of like male-dominated patriarchal culture, and that women's expression and skill development, participation in the public sphere, like employment and education, lags behind other parts of that country, right? But this was an interesting one to speak to the men in particular, and there were five men. And the men used a very particular term, and they said the men didn't want their wives to view, and they used a term that means inappropriate things or forbidden things. And at first, my reaction to them was thinking, wow, like it's surprised me that men were speaking about their wives viewing inappropriate things, because I thought it seemed to me like men view more inappropriate things like, pornographic materials and things on the internet. And so I was thinking like, geez, what are they talking about? I was confused. So I continued to ask. And so what they revealed is that they were worried that their wives would get what they found to be radical ideas of things like women's position in society and gender equality and so on. So that part of Turkey is still very dominated by the patriarchal culture of traditional Anatolian culture, Turkish culture. And so what they were saying is that they were worried that their wives would get kind of images of women, ideas of women who lived in other parts of Turkey or other parts of the world, and they would become dissatisfied with the life in that part of Turkey, right? Now there was one part of it that occurred that came to me in terms of like, well, the kind of a resistance to change and this conservatism that we have the world, we want it to stay the way it is. There was another part where there was a bit of a humane side to it as well, is that there was one man who spoke that he didn't want his kids in particular using the internet because he worried that they would want things that he couldn't afford. So, they lived in a very simple life in a village, and so, they had their what they needed, right? But they didn't have all sorts of things such as fancy cars, fancy clothing, taking fancy vacations, and so on. And so for him, he was worried that like his children would become dissatisfied with what he could provide, economically speaking, if they were exposed to kind of the lifestyles of other people, if they were seeing what people were consuming on Facebook. You see their homes, you see the holidays they're taking, and things like that. But in general, kind of this gender dynamic was one that was seen more interested in the preservation of men's dominance in East Anatolia, and less in terms of like not wanting people to be dissatisfied with their lives. Okay, so this is it. I've reached the end. So please move on to the next slide. And the next slide is where I give my thanks. I thank you all once again for having me here. Please connect to me digitally. These days, this is the best we can do. I give you my Twitter address, my email, and my LinkedIn address. I certainly welcome everybody to get in touch with me. And also, we're not done. We're here for a bit longer. So, I certainly welcome any comments and questions. And now I turn it back to Dr. Chandan. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Chandan, if the participants were interested in the copies of these articles, they're certainly welcome to email me, or I believe I also have sent copies to Dr. Manjunatha.
Yes, received. Okay, Professor. I'll be sharing the same.
Okay, thank you, sir.
I request the attendees to please post your questions in the chat box. Or we also have a WhatsApp group and Telegram group. You can also post your questions there if you have any.
There is a question. There is a decline in the mass media activity. There is a readership of newspaper in Turkey. Sir, is it because of the increasing in the digital literacy? And it is also shown in your presentation that the people are using digital media for the information more.
Well, I don't have actual strong data to make a scientific statement about this one. However, my general sense is that yes, it's the decline in readership in so many parts of the world of the print media via the actual news paper, right? You all may know that India is a bit of an outlier in this regard, whereas the people are, reading the newspaper at high levels. I think in other parts of the world, like Turkey, the readership is going down because this is shifting to people reading news on the digital platforms. Sometimes this is just them reading it digitally via their smartphone or their laptops and so on. So it's not that they're reading less news, it's that they're reading it in a digital format more than they're reading it in a print format.
This question is a general question, okay, Professor.
Sure.
Professor Mahesh is asking, sir, please throw some light on the Arab Spring because in India the students are learning a lot about the Arab Spring. Can you bring some light on, throw some light on Arab Spring? What is it? How it happened and the results of the same?
Well, okay, so thank you, Dr. Mahesh. Okay, well, I am based in Abu Dhabi in United Arab Emirates, and I can tell you that there was no Arab Spring in the United Arab Emirates. In a sense, it did not occur here. And so the idea of the Arab Spring is something that has occurred, in the previous decade in other parts of the Middle East and North African countries. However, that did not occur where I am currently living and based. So the idea of the Arab Spring, however, and more generally, if I can speak outside of the country where I'm based, is that people use the digital media platforms as a basis for organizing for protest movements, some of which seem to be effective in getting change in governments in certain countries. So. I remember at that time I was in the United States, and when you go to the country of Libya, it was in fact shocking that Muammar Gaddafi, who had been the leader of Libya for decades, we almost nearly watched him being executed by a mob crowd by a live social media. It was a quite shocking and different kind of thing. So it became impossible in some places for the government to control the dissenting movements and the protests, and a lot of this was centered around like kind of the bypassing kind of the traditional media forms such as newspaper, television, radio news, and getting news that was kind of posting in a very like kind of rapid fire way as people were engaged in protests. So you would probably want to look at other countries such as Tunisia or Egypt and maybe some others as being the ones where the Arab Spring has most strongly happened. I think the Gulf countries, diplomatically we call it the Arab Gulf or the Persian Gulf, but these Gulf GCC countries is much less of a presence of the Arab Spring. And if I would, probably I could say most of my undergraduate students would not really be familiar with this term.
Glenn, I have one personal question.
Yeah.
I went through the Calfia University website, okay, to search for you, and okay, there I observed that you have a very strong, okay, the sociology department and media studies, okay, department there. So, what are the programs that you offer there, and what are the prospectus of the different programs? Because many the students have joined here, so they'll be enlightened. Okay, please throw some insights on what kind of academic activities that take place in Kalfiya University.
At Khalifa, are you
Yeah.
asking about Khalifa?
It-
Well, we're actually a very small, it's one of the top ranked universities in the Middle East, North Africa region, and it's the top in the UAE. However, it has a very short history. Everything in the UAE is a relatively new, okay? And this is why I moved here in part was to be in a place where I could make a contribution to the development of the country and the institutions in the country. So in general, the Middle East and the UAE are rather underdeveloped in terms of social sciences, humanities and social sciences. So they're strong in this region of the world. The focus has been on STEM fields like science and engineering. And indeed, Khalifa University was a merger just a few years back of three institutions. The first was the Petroleum Institute, which was all about the engineering of drilling and refining petroleum, petrochemicals, and so on. The second was one called the Masdar Institute, which is all about, ironically, all about the technology of alternative energies and renewable energies. We also have, in addition to the wealth of petroleum in the UAE, we also have a massive wealth of sunshine. So, you know, as the oil runs out, maybe they'll invest in solar energies and things. And then finally, we had what was called the Khalifa University of Science, Technology, and Research, or KUSTAR. And a few years back, about 5 years ago, these three merged. So I work in a department of humanities and social sciences, and we are like, the university where I work is a very limited in terms of like kind of, we don't have set departments in humanities and social sciences. In the West or in India, you would have a department of sociology and a department of accounting and a department of language studies and so on. And here we're all kind of jammed in together. And so we offer only programs in science and technology fields. So as much as I would like to encourage the students, like, hey, why don't you take a master's in a place like the UAE? It's a great place to live and work. I'm very happy here. However, if you're interested in studying media studies, this might not be the place for you. On the other hand, if you are a researcher who wants to make a mark, any media studies that have been conducted in other countries are probably not yet conducted in a very new country like the UAE. And so if you were to want to make a mark, that simply just replicating the types of studies that have happened in countries such as Japan or you know, UK or whatever would be something that would be the first ever study if you were to come to a GCC country like Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and so on. Yeah, thanks for asking that.
So there's one more question from Aditi. The question is, femicide in Turkey took the world by storm last year and sparked the black and white challenge among women across the world. If we take the digital divide and your research findings in consideration, do you think the challenge and the uproar worldwide had any effect on the government and people of Turkey?
Well, like so many places, the people in the government may not be entirely the same, right? And so, you know, given what seems to be in many areas of the world, the rise of this populist governments, it may not, these social movements may have a limited effect, right? However, at the same time, you can't take a country like Turkey or pretty much any country and say, like, you know, kind of there's one mentality. There's always kind of a cultural war, these kind of flows of things. And so Turkey is a really interesting country in my mind, because you know, it is part of it wants to be European, and people want to join the EU, and there's a part of it that wants to kind of close off to the West and to kind of be more closely associated with countries in farther east in, say, Central Asia, Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and so on. And so I just kind of see it as a place where there's constantly this struggle of you know, tensions between the traditional and the modern societies, and this is something that seems repeated in general from place to place to place. So most of the people who are living in the east part of Turkey, where I do my work, are a bit more conservative. And the people who are probably more progressive are often those, like, academics are a different breed, right? And maybe much more much more progressive in relation to the governments of their provinces and such. But I point out that actually the academics get paid more for working in this region of Turkey, this East Anatolia. They receive like what's called a hazard pay, or like, because they have to create an economic incentives. Most of the people getting their PhDs are in these major cities in the west part of Turkey, and so to get the people to go out, like, assistant professors to go out and work in a place like Bayburt or Erzincan, they have to kind of offer them incentives to do it. So thank you for that.
All right, one more question. This is quite
Sure.
interesting. How did digital media users, uh, uh, uh, the kind of ratio, that's the one who's going to get vaccinated and the ones who are against vaccination? So how is this misinformation about vaccine seen on social media and other media platforms? Plus, we see that there is the anti-vaxxer movement, and they also have access to internet, and they're getting their information from somewhere. And we also have mainstream media platforms who are not showcasing this information. Yes, we have protests going on, we have a lot of things going on, but none of this is being said in the media. Can you tell a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think it's related to the more general issue of internet skills or digital skills to these kind of information skills. So if people want to know about, say, COVID, which is on everybody's mind these days, are they just kind of taking whatever posting they can find if they're on the social media platform or whatever, or are they, like, kind of, for example, following World Health Organization or kind of national clearinghouses for information? And so this is related to these information skills, which is how people can not only find information, but also they can determine whether the information itself is reliable or whether it is or is less so, right? And so I think about my wife's granddad, and he passed away, unfortunately, but God bless him. If he were here, he would be probably 85 years old. And he grew up in an era when, like, anything that was in print was considered to be true because it came through an editor via a book, or it came through an editor at a media organization, say a magazine or a newspaper publication, and so on. And so he would have a kind of a low level of this information skill because he would not be able to determine what's reliable, valid information and what's not. Right. And I think it also then translates into the strategic skills of the internet, is that if you're getting the information, can you use it for your own well-being, whether it's like health related or whatever. And so the better information skills people have and the better strategic skills they have in terms of digital skills, the healthier they're likely to be. And so that was my general statement regarding COVID. That is, if the people can figure out if it's like reliable or not reliable, then they can make a decision based on that information, not based on rumor, not based on rubbish that's showing up in somebody's post, and they can make the best decision. Which, if I were making a recommendation, I would say consult World Health Organization information about the vaccines and whether the vaccines are safe, and try not to listen to the rumors and things like that. So thank you. That's a great question because it's on everybody's mind these days, of course.
So one more question. This is from Dr. Kaveri Devi Mishra. How do you tackle with internet issues and bandwidth problems? Did you face these challenges during your research?
I did not face those because what I did is I had a whole team. I wouldn't call it my research. It was the research that I participated in. I had three Turkish professors and then we had about 10 or 11 PhD students. As you can imagine, setting up the PCs and doing the the tracking of these tests and all is very time consuming, and so I can't take credit for it at all. I had tremendous help. We didn't deal with the bandwidth issues at all, download speeds, and this is because we used the locations on the universities in the 3 provinces, which are located in the capital city of each province. Well, sometimes we used a branch campus also in some of the smaller towns where they would have a smaller campus. But generally, we avoided that by using the internet at the university. So, yeah, we're blessed, right, to have generally in universities to have superior technical capacity.
Okay. One more question, sir. In China, the regime is already implemented facial recognition softwares, and there's mass surveillance happening. And so this is basically to clamp down on dissents and trying catching hold of them. So, are there any such developments in Turkey from the government authorities? This question is from Tenzin.
Well, I'm not as much of an expert on Turkey as I might like to be. I've collaborated over a period of about 5 years with my colleagues there, but I don't know everything that's happening. I guess this capability is coming everywhere. As the technology is very affordable and it becomes present in every place you go, it's becoming more and more. It's going to pop up everywhere. So it's probably a matter of time until it does develop. My general take on these emergent is technologies such as this that are really related to like kind of social control and privacy issues, is that the policy and the law tends to lag behind. So we're technological advance happens so quickly, and that we tend to just move forward and put these systems in place without really thinking about the consequences for things such as human rights or privacy or even just humanistic kind of concerns about whether people have a right to kind of be left alone and not have their images collected in some digital format somewhere, but it's coming. It will come. I have like 2 sides to me, right? I've studied this surveillance for early on, and I'm not really deep into the surveillance studies field, but I've kind of kept an eye on it, and it's just kind of happening and happening and happening like more and more and more every day. But the interesting thing is that it happens in kind of soft and subtle ways. So somebody posts a picture on Facebook, and I just happen to be there like in the background. Well, Facebook uses this face recognition software, and then it sends me a notification to ask me is this you or not. Like there's a picture of people, but then I just happen to be like back there, and then it picks up my face, and it's like it's strange. And I also this call me cynical, but I think a number 2 years ago maybe, Facebook was having this thing where they were running this. They try to get people to post certain things, and I remember when I first started with Facebook, my wife said everybody is supposed to post a picture of a celebrity who people think you look like, right? And so I did that, but then she came back a couple of years ago and she said everybody is like supposed to post a picture of themselves from like 10 years back, and so to see what you looked like 10 years ago. And I'm thinking like, I'm cynical, I admit it, but it seems like somebody at Facebook was trying to orchestrate a project where they could capture your current face and one from 10 years ago, and then they could do some sort of programming to like kind of, you know, see if they could improve upon this aging software. I mean, we see the positive uses of it, right? Like, okay, there's a child who is missing and was missing 5 years ago, and you know, at 5 years old, here's the picture, and then you see like at 10 years old, this is what the child probably looks like. You know, it's very helpful, but I don't know that Facebook would use it in quite that same way. You know, I think that they're probably using it for like culling big data and trying to figure out people's behaviors and to profit from the marketing side of being able to profile people. But it's great, right? I mean, you know, I have two sides to me. One side is like, man, it's like, you know, we have this saying that like the cat is out of the bag, right? You let the cat out of the bag, it's impossible to put a cat back into a bag because that's not the way cats work, right? So it's like you've opened this, everything has come out, right? And so I was thinking like maybe, you know, we're always in this struggle between the two things. Is like, you know, can we maintain some privacy, or should everything just be public? And if everything is public, then it should be public for everybody, right? If my life is searchable, if my face is searchable, then why not the leadership of a corporation, or why not the leadership of a government? But this is just my take. I remember there was I'm from the United States, born and raised, and I remember working at another university, Miami University, and the governor approved a law that allowed people to carry guns, handguns, onto campus, right? And then I found out that you're not allowed to bring a gun into the governor's office or the governor of that state. So of course I wrote a letter. I said, well, if it's okay for them to bring a gun into my office, then, you know, and that's legal and a protected legal right, then what about your office? What makes your office different that, you know, your office is off limits? A little bit of a diversion, right? But I mean, you know, I also take these things with a sense of humor, I suppose, right? Because really when it comes down to it, China is going to do whatever they're going to do, and the governor of a state in the United States is going to do whatever they're going to do. And as you've seen, there are some questions that I think that's not worth it for me to really have an open comment, because, you know, it's not in my interest. But in other cases, I think the governor of a state in the United States could care less what I have to say. But I'm grateful for my colleagues here, because if I could have sparked any information, any thoughtful conversation or whatever, you know, this is what it's all about. I'm grateful for this opportunity and for I see 59 people in attendance, so that's quite a lot. If we were in a room together, it would have a feeling of being a nice, robust group of people.
We had close to 92 people. Most of them have left probably now, I think.
92. Ooh.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. All right, so that was a really great session and really great answers for the questions. We would like to thank Dr. Glenn W. Mushert for spending his precious time with all of us in this virtual platform. His research study on digital divide in Turkey, the internet, and social inequality in international perspective has provided us knowledge about the influence of social inequalities towards access to digital literacy. His study presents the presence of digital inclusivity based on skills, age, gender, income in a progressive society. His knowledge acquired from his decades of research experience has made this session truly knowledgeable. I'm sure all of you have found this session knowledgeable. Sir, thank you so much for sharing your precious time and knowledge with us. Thank you.
It's truly an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. This is Manjunath here. Thank you so much for joining.